Good evening and welcome to the Tzutzais Parsha, the sparks, the tidbit of the Parsha, the weekly Torah portion. This week we read the Parsha called Ki Savo. It's a Parsha that is devoted to several themes, not as many as last week's. It begins with Bikurim, with the first fruits, and then it goes into the blessings and that which could look like the opposite of blessings, referred to as the tochacha, the words of rebuke. We'll get into that later. It's also a very auspicious Shabbos, particularly because it is Chai Elul, the 18th day of the month of Elul. This day in history marks two very important birthdays. It's the birthday of the Baal Shem Tov, and 47 years later, the birthday of the Alter Rebbe, the first Chabad Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi. And as such, these are days that are associated with Chai. The 18th day of Elul is Chai Elul, because, as the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe remarked, it's the day that gives life to the month of Elul. In general, the Hasidic masters were here not to add anything to Judaism, of course not to subtract, but to instill new life, new vigor, new vitality. And that is what the Hasidic teachings are all about. But before we get into the 18th of Elul, Chai Elul, let's focus a little bit on the Parsha and show some connections to Chai Elul. The very first word of the Parsha, which is not included in the name, but it's a very auspicious word, is V'haya. And together with the next two words, Parsha Ki Savo, and it will come to pass, Ki Savo, that you will come to the land, and then you will bring your first fruits. Now the word V'haya sounds like a pretty prosaic word. It will come to pass, it will be. But according to the Midrash, V'haya is a very significant word. The word V'haya implies simcha, joy. The Talmud says a similar thing about another word, Vayehi, in the reverse manner. The word Vayehi, and it was, and it happened, as in the Megillus Esther, the book of Esther, Vayehi b'mei Achashverosh, and it happened, it was in the days of Achashverosh. So the Talmud says whenever that word appears, or in most cases, it's a sign of something tragic that is going to happen. It's a sign of misfortune, of anguish, of pain. But conversely, the Midrash says that whenever it says V'haya, and it will be, it's an expression of simcha, an expression of joy. One explanation of that is the word Vayehi, if you take the Vav off the word, Yehi itself means it will be, it's future. So when you add on the Vav, you turn the future into the past. V'haya is the reverse. The word haya by itself, without the vav that precedes it, means it was, it's past. If you put in the vav, it becomes v'haya, it will be in the future. It's a sign of the future. That's the difference between sadness and happiness. Sadness comes from people who wallow in the past, in the grief of the past, and who can't get out of the rut they're in. Joy is experienced when a person sees the good in everything, sees the future, how things will become better, how people look forward to the Messianic age when everything will be in a positive mode. And even now, even before that happens, we already are anticipating that and focused on that so that we can experience joy. So with that introduction, the very first word, V'haya, is an expression of joy. How does that expression of joy fit into this Parsha? So it fits in on two levels. It fits in by connecting it to the end of last week's Parsha, and it fits in to this week's Parsha, to the continuation of the Parsha. Let's start with last week, because it comes first. Last week's Parsha ended with a commandment to remember and obliterate Amalek. As we discussed last week, Amalek was an evil nation, the first nation to wage war against the Jews after they left Egypt and after the sea was split and they were free from Egyptian mastery. as they were marching forward, ready to go into Israel, Amalek came and attacked them. So Amalek is symbolized by the hatred of the Jewish people who cannot tolerate their existence, filled with a diabolical desire and ambition to annihilate them, force of genocide, and will stop at nothing. We also explained that Amalek is not just an external evil, but it's also an internal evil. It's an expression of doubt. The word Amalek itself numerically adds up to the word suffix, which means doubt. What does Amalek do? It sows doubts. It makes us doubt ourselves and doubt all the things that we do that are good, and doubt whether the things that we do that aren't good, if they're truly not so good, maybe I can get away with it. In short, Amalek sows doubts. When you defeat Amalek, what you're doing is defeating doubt. That means that you're able to go on in life and not be bogged down by these gnawing doubts that keep people from progressing. There's an expression that's quoted in Jewish sources, although the original source is not known. Ein simcha kahataras hasfekos. There is no joy as great as the resolution of doubts. Human beings could go through a lot of hardship as long as they know where they're going, why they're going, how they're going. They can weather all the different storms. Nothing in the world will make you depressed. Nothing will deter you if you have certainty, if you know who you are and where you're going. But if you have doubts, that will lead you to depression. That will lead you to sadness. When you resolve those doubts, get rid of Amalek, the internal Amalek, and as a result you also get rid of the external Amalek, you are able to feel the most exhilarating simcha. So that's why we finished talking about Amalek, which brings us to simcha. And by the way, that comment, that the reason why Amalek is associated with simcha, with joy, because it's a resolution of doubts, is a concept that the Rebbe had mentioned in relation to the month of Adar, why it's such a joyous month, because it's the month in which we defeated the descendant of Amalek, Haman. And that's why it's such a joyous time, because we got rid of the doubts. So the Torah is intimating that here as well. You finish with Amalek, v'haya, and you will experience great joy. Then there's also a connection to what follows. The Or HaChaim HaKadosh, the holy Or HaChaim as he's called, great Sephardic sage of the 18th century, explains that the following words also relate to V'haya, to joy. What are the following words? Ki Savo el ha'aretz, when you enter the land. That where could a Jew experience true joy? Only in the land of Israel. Now, does that mean that we can't have any joy in the diaspora? No, of course. We can have joy, and we're obligated to have joy, but we have to make extra efforts. It doesn't come natural, because golus, because exile, not just geographic exile, but even in Israel, you can still be in exile if your mindset is an exile mindset. That steals, that robs us of our joy. Israel is the land that God watches over, as the Torah says, from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. That means God's presence in Israel is more pronounced, and wherever God's presence is pronounced, there's greater joy. So V'haya, if you want to have simcha, you want to have joy, Ki Savo el ha'aretz, it requires that you enter into the land, that you not just visit the land, and not just move to the land, but you enter into it. There's a very big difference between the two. There's a similar expression. The Torah says, the nations of the world will see the name of God called upon you, and they will fear you. And that, the Talmud says, refers to wearing tefillin. And once the Alter Rebbe, his birthday, we will be celebrating on Shabbos, the 18th of Elul, was wearing his tefillin, and some Russian Gentile official saw him, and he was taken aback and was filled with fear. And someone asked the Alter Rebbe how that happened, and he explained that that's what the Talmud says, that when you wear tefillin, the people of the world, the nations of the world, will be awestruck and even overcome with fear. So he says, well, I wear tefillin, it doesn't happen. He says, if you examine the words of the Talmud, it says, these are tefillin sheberosh, tefillin that are in the head, not tefillin on the head. Yes, we wear it on the head, but if the message of tefillin penetrates into the head, we have the consciousness of tefillin. That's what commands the respect of all the nations of the world. So we have this concept of joy that's connected to the end of last week's parsha, getting rid of Amalek, and we have it connected to the following words of this week's parsha, entering into the land. Now, there's an incredible story. It's associated with the opening words of this parsha and with Chai Elul. The Rebbe Rashab, that's the previous Rebbe's father, once revealed to his son, the previous Rebbe, that he experienced a out of this world experience, an otherworldly experience, where he attended, his soul obviously attended a celebration of the Baal Shem Tov's birthday in Gan Eden in paradise. And he revealed to his son 7 teachings of the Baal Shem Tov on this parsha that he heard there in Gan Eden in paradise. And one of those teachings is on the very first verse. Let's read that first verse. It will be, when you enter the land that God your God gives you as an inheritance, and you possess it, and you will dwell in it. So the Baal Shem Tov explained that the word land, the Midrash says, is a metaphor for the will of God. And it also is a metaphor for the passion, because the word ratzon, which is will in Hebrew, or eretz, which has that root, ratzon, in it, also has the root for rutz, which is running. So in other words, if you want to enter into the state of great desire to do God's will, and this is something that God, your God, has given you. It's something that comes from above. When we experience this passion to get closer to God, to want to enter into God's will, we then realize that this is something that God has given us. It's a gift, but it's not enough. You can't rely on gifts. You have to then settle the land and dwell in it. You have to take the inspiration that you have, that comes from above, the gift from above, and to take what he calls the iris, the lights, the energy, and put it in kalim, into vessels. This is what they did with the first fruits. The simple meaning of the text. They would take the first fruits and put it in a basket and bring it to the Beis Hamikdash. Well, here also you take the inspiration, the fruits, and you put it in a basket, into a vessel. And that way, you will go around, you will realize that wherever you go, it's all by divine providence. Why does a Jew end up in a certain place? Because you plan to go there. Sometimes you think you planned, but you're there because God put you there. It's by divine providence. And what is the providence for? What is the message? What is God trying to tell us? And the answer is that this is a place where we have to bring God's presence, publicize God to the world. We go to this place that God has sent us. L'shaken shmo sham, in the next verse, end of verse 2, to make his name dwell there. So the Baal Shem Tov teaching, if we sum it up, is every Jew has these spiritual experiences, and he wants to get closer to God's will, and he has this passion, and he realizes that this is something that God gives you, this inspiration. You have to then take the inspiration and find a way of internalizing it, creating a receptacle, a process through which it can be internalized, and then you go out to the rest of the world and you spread the message. This is actually a teaching that relates both to the Baal Shem Tov and the Alter Rebbe. The Baal Shem Tov publicized godliness to the world. The Alter Rebbe created the box, the basket, the vessel by allowing the spiritual ideals and ideas of the Baal Shem Tov to be internalized by bringing the ideas into a rational system of thought that enables the mind to wrap its arms around the spiritual ideas. And once the mind accesses it and internalizes it, it affects a change in the person's emotions and in the person's behavior. Now, the Torah speaks about bikurim, first fruits. When did that mitzvah begin? So Rashi quotes the Talmud that the Jews, when they entered into Israel, did not have to bring the first fruits. They had to wait until after the land was conquered and settled. And the Rebbe explains that there's a very powerful message there. The whole idea of bringing first fruits is to express gratitude to God and simcha and joy. Another time that simcha is mentioned in this parsha in relation to bringing the first fruits, you bring it in a state of joy, of exhilaration and gratitude. Joy and gratitude go hand in hand. Well, why did you have to wait 14 years? 7 years of conquest, 7 years of dividing the land. Some people already had access to the land. They should have brought the first fruits immediately. So the Rebbe says, here's a powerful lesson. That as long as you know that there's one Jew out there who doesn't yet have his part of the land, he's still wandering, he's still not grounded, he's still missing something, you cannot fully express your own joy. This is the demonstration of the extent to which we feel the love for one another and the unity of the Jewish people. That we cannot fully appreciate what we have and express gratitude and be joyous until we see to it that every Jew has what it takes for him to have a good life. And this is a lesson that applies to us in Golus, in exile. There are some Jews who are not, at least they think they're not, in exile. They prosper materially, and they also are doing very well spiritually. They study Torah, they do mitzvahs, they're kind, and they're compassionate, and they do everything right. It seems that way, at least. So do they need Mashiach? Do they need redemption? The answer is, of course, yes, they do need. But putting that aside, that no matter how much a person is accomplished and how much spiritual capital a person has, they're still poor relative to what there is to have, which will be receiving in the Messianic age. But putting that aside, even if you have everything, you're the richest person in the world in the spiritual sense of the word, you cannot be satisfied until every Jew also enjoys what you have. And until everyone has it, you know you're still in Golus, you're still in exile. Bikurim, the Rebbe says on a very simple level, is also the story of education of our children. Bikurim, this is God coming into his vineyard. We are God's vineyard, and he sees a beautiful fruit. Fruit had just become ripened. A young child just became bar or bas mitzvah. A young person, or an older person for that matter, discovers the beauty of Judaism. What are you supposed to do? The person is interested. The person is committed to doing the mitzvah. That's what bar mitzvah means. Someone who is committed to the commandments. The person becomes interested in Judaism. You cannot just stop there. You have to take him to the Beis HaMikdash. You have to take him until the Holy Temple. Not just be content with starting the person off and letting him go on his own. I just want to add an editorial comment on that observation of the Rebbe, that it seems to contradict another teaching of the Rebbe, where he speaks about how when you light the menorah, you're supposed to light it in a way that the flame goes by itself. But it doesn't need you to keep standing there and lighting the flame. And the Rebbe also said that in Ethics of the Fathers, it says, you shall establish many students. It doesn't say teach many students, but stand them up. Get them to stand on their own 2 feet. And yet here we're saying you have to take them all the way to the Beis HaMikdash. And I think there's no contradiction, because when you get the student to stand on his own 2 feet, The reason why he's standing on his own 2 feet is because you got him there. You can take the credit for his accomplishments because you put that flame on his wick and got him to light up and bring it. You brought the first fruits, this Jew, to the temple through your efforts. It's as if you were there for every step of the way. When you bring your first fruits, you have to express gratitude. And the Torah gives us the saying, the things that we're supposed to say. And in fact, this is what we say on the Passover Seder. And this starts off in verse 5, chapter 26, verse 5. Then you shall call out and say before God your God. What do we say? We review Jewish history, highlights of Jewish history. And it begins even before we were in Egypt. And what is it that we say? An Aramean tried to destroy my forefather. And then he descended in Egypt and sojourned there. Which referring to Jacob, our forefather, who lived amongst the Arameans, specifically amongst his uncle and later father-in-law, Lavan the Aramean. And in the Haggadah, we add that Lavan tried to destroy everything. He was even worse than Pharaoh. Pharaoh just tried to kill the boys, but he would let the girls remain alive. But Lavan wanted to destroy everything. The simple meaning of that is that he was willing to kill his own children and grandchildren to see to it that there should not be a Jewish nation. But it's a little hard to fathom why even Lavan, the evil Lavan, the cunning Lavan, the swindler Lavan, would want to do this to his children. So I think there might be another layer of understanding of that. When it says he wanted to uproot everything, the word everything in Hebrew, kol, also has another connotation. The Jewish people have 2 identities. There's Klal Yisrael, and there's what they call Reb Yisrael. There's the Jewish collectiveness, the Jewish people as a whole, and there's the individual Jew. Now, the individual Jew could never have survived history, all the onslaught of our enemies, starting with Amalek that I mentioned before, and going through all of history, if it was just the individual Jew. Our strength is that we are part of Klal Yisrael. We are part of a organic whole, of a collective entity, a tzibur. Tzibur in Hebrew is community, congregation. It's a composite of 3 letters. Tzadik, which stands for the righteous. Beis, Bet, Beinani, the intermediates. Reish, Rishoyim, those who are still short of being righteous, to put it euphemistically. That means our existence consists of all layers and segments of the community, that we are all one. Our enemies look at us as one. They don't care if we're secular, religious, if we're Sephardic, Ashkenazic. The real die-hard anti-Semites hate us all. But we should certainly recognize the unity of all the Jewish people. That klal, or that tzibur, the Talmud says, tzibur eino mes. A community does not die. Individuals could die, but a community has continuity. That concept of Klal Yisrael, of community, is hinted by the word kol, everything, all of it. And that's what Lavan, bikesh lakeres hakol, he sought to uproot everything, meaning the collective nature of the Jewish people, because that would give them continuity. And Lavan didn't mind the individual Jew. He couldn't tolerate the Jewish people as a whole. There's a famous joke that is told, a sad joke, that the difference between anti-Semites and Jews is that anti-Semites love individual Jews, their doctor, their lawyer, their accountant, their neighbor. They just can't stand the Jewish people. Jews love the Jewish people, of course, whether we think of ourselves as we ought to, that we are unique people, chosen people, but we don't get along with individuals. And though this is a joke, I'm citing this as a very serious point, that the enemies of Israel could tolerate the individual Jew, but not the collective Jew. Napoleon is an example of that. He didn't mind individual Jews, giving them freedom, but he didn't like the concept of a Jewish nation. If you're in France, you're French. If you're in Germany, you're German, not a Jewish people. So the concept of Jewish peoplehood was anathema to Lavan. And that's what it means. He tried to destroy us. And when we come to Israel and we bring our first fruits, we are underscoring, we are highlighting the collective nature of the Jewish people. As I mentioned before, we're not capable of even expressing gratitude until all of us share in the same bounty. Then we're going to skip over to the part of the Parsha where God promises us wonderful things if we follow His commandments. And then in chapter 28, the middle of that, he starts off in verse 15. What will happen if we will not listen to God's commandments? However, or before the however, it goes on with 98 terrible, what most people would call curses, many of which, unfortunately, tragically, came true, especially in the Holocaust. But we don't look at these as curses. We look at these as hidden blessings. There's a story, a famous story told, again, in the Alter Rebbe, who was the founder of the Chabad Hasidic movement, whose birthday we are going to observe Shabbos, the 18th of Elul. And he usually read the Torah on Shabbos, and one Shabbos, and they read this section, he was away. His young son, Dov Ber, who succeeded him later on, known as the Middle Rebbe, was close to Bar Mitzvah, and he heard the reading, and he heard these curses. And it so pained him that he fainted, and he was ill for a few weeks. And when someone asked him, didn't you hear these curses last year? And it didn't affect you. And his answer was, when my father reads, there are no curses. And there's a double meaning to that. Number one, when his father reads, his father didn't just read the words, but when he read it, he projected its deeper meaning, its underlying meaning, its esoteric meaning. And that's what the sensitive son, who turned out to be the great Rebbe when his father passed away, that's what he was able to detect. And therefore he didn't hear curses, he heard blessings. When someone else of a lower caliber read this, he was able to hear the external, the outward side of these curses, and he didn't hear the blessings, and that's why he took it to heart so severely. With that introduction, there are many commentators who actually show how different verses which sound terrible, frightening, are actually positive. What does that mean? That means that ultimately God only wants to give us blessings. We can take the blessings and distort them to turn them into the opposite of blessings. Ultimately, even when that happens, and it has happened unfortunately, they will be transformed into blessings in the Messianic age. Let's take one or two examples. There's a verse where it talks about how we will become crazy. In verse 27, for example, 28 rather, it says, God will strike you with madness. And then there's another verse that says, V'hayisa meshuga v'mara einecha. That's in verse 34. You will go mad from the sight of your eyes that you will see. Hey, that's terrible, terrible curse. That we lose our minds because of all the pain and suffering. But there's a deeper understanding of that. The concept of madness or foolishness, sometimes we do things that make no sense. They're irrational. And when people behave irrationally all the time, we call them meshuga. They're crazy. There's something wrong with them. But there's also a positive type of mishuga, of someone who is mentally unbalanced, in a positive way. There's a famous story in the Talmud. There was a wedding, and one of the great sages was dancing in this wedding and was making a fool of himself. He was juggling, and another one of the rabbis said to him, "It's not becoming for a sage to behave in such an undignified manner." But that didn't deter the sage. He kept on bringing joy to the bridegroom, the bride, by dancing in this manner. When he died, people were able to see a fire surrounding his grave, as if to say, there's something holy over there, something divine in this person. And the rabbi who originally criticized him said, you know what caused him to be in this position where he was considered to be above and beyond the norm? It's because he behaved in that manner. He behaved in a manner of shtus, of foolishness. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe, in a discourse that he gave for publication to be studied on the day that he passed away, and it became like his last will and testament, and we study that discourse every year with the Rebbe's commentary on it. And he explains that the word shtus, foolishness, actually comes from a root that means to stray, to deviate. There's a norm, and when you deviate, you're called a shota, a fool, an idiot. But you can deviate in two ways. You can go beneath the line, that's real foolishness, when people behave in an irrational manner, and you can go above the line when you behave in what some people would call a trans-rational or supra-rational, above logic. It says Mashiach will come when we are distracted. So the Alter Rebbe says, how could that be? We're not supposed to be distracted. We're supposed to think about and pray for him every day. So the Alter Rebbe explains it means we're supposed to look at Mashiach in ways that reflect his trans-rational, his supra-rational status. That Mashiach is not just a conventional leader who's going to lead us in a conventional path. He's going to bring us to something that is above and beyond the norm. And therefore, the ultimate blessing is that we ourselves become Meshuggah, that we are not tied to conventionality. We're not tied to mediocrity. We're not tied to just normalcy. We go beyond, and we're able to accomplish things that go way beyond. So that's a blessing, not a curse. The end of the Tochacha, after the 98, verse 58, oh, I'm sorry, not 58. But there's a verse where God says, I'll soon find it, that there's going to be a plague that is not even written in the Torah. What does he mean by, that's in verse 61. Gam kol choli v'chol maka shelo kosev b'sefer HaTorah hazos. Even any illness and any blow that is not written in this book of the Torah, God will bring upon you until you are destroyed. What does he mean by a curse that is not written in the Torah? So the Talmud says it refers to the death of the righteous. So the question is, if the Torah didn't want to mention it, why did the rabbis mention the meaning of this? And why didn't the Torah say what this plague is? It says plenty of other things that are very powerful and sad and extreme, so why not mention the death of tzaddikim? Well, a simple explanation would be that it's so tragic and so painful that it can't even be written. Something that is not written expresses an idea that you can't put it in words. Another way of looking at it a little deeper is that when a person suffers, they can still find ways of going on with life. Because they're able to somehow psychologically deal with their suffering and absorb it. So you get another blow, you absorb it. But sometimes you get a blow that is so bad that it reminds you and it activates all the other blows, and you feel all of those. That's why it can't be written, because it's too powerful. It can't be put into words. But there's another way of understanding this. The rabbis were the ones who transmitted the oral Torah. The written Torah we have in front of us. The oral Torah is what gives the written Torah meaning and relevance. Without the oral Torah, the written Torah has no meaning. The written Torah cannot be understood. Who transmits the oral Torah? The rabbis, the tzaddikim, the righteous ones, the ones who are faithful to the tradition. And that's the curse when the tzaddikim pass away and we no longer have that oral tradition, or the oral tradition is weakened. That's the ultimate curse. It's not written in the Torah. It's about the part of Judaism that is oral, that is not written. What that means, in somewhat different words, Judaism is made up of two parts. There's a part that is exoteric, it's revealed, it's down to earth, it's concrete, put on tefillin, read the Shema, eat kosher, so on and so forth. Then there's the esoteric, there's the deeper spiritual meaning behind everything. And that spiritual meaning cannot be captured in words. They are spiritual feelings. And that is the ultimate blessing, that we not only have that which is written in the Torah, but we're also able to capture that which is not written in the Torah, the spiritual, the between the lines, the flavor, the coloring. When God gave us the Torah at Mount Sinai, it says it was accompanied with thunder and lightning. And yet he said the Ten Commandments, because Torah has both. We have the Ten Commandments and all the derivatives of the Ten Commandments, the whole written Torah, and we also have the thunder and the lightning. Who gave us the thunder and the lightning? Who were the greatest contributors to it? These were the masters of Hasidism, the Baal Shem Tov and the Alter Rebbe. And when I say the Alter Rebbe, I mean all the Chabad Rebbes unto our Rebbe. They gave us the part of Torah that is not written in the Torah, that is not captured by words, but is the thunder and the lightning. And when you have that which is not written in the Torah, that's what brings us the Geula, that's what brings us to the redemption through Mashiach. Have a good evening, and a good Shabbos, and a happy Chai Elul.